What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be doing a tier list of every single NHL team in the order of from what I like the most to the team I can't stand the least. So if you guys are a fan of any of the teams in the NHL, don't take this personally. This is just a fun list I'm making. I don't have really a lot of hate for any other team except one, and you'll be able to see that by the end of this list. So if you enjoy NHL related videos regardless of the team you root for, definitely consider dropping a subscription and turning on notifications. Also go down in the description and follow me on Twitter if you haven't already. And yeah, let's jump into this. So starting off with the Anaheim Ducks. If you'd asked me a few years ago, back when the Ducks had played the Jets back in that first round a few years back, I would have said nope, D-list right there. But now and everything like that from the past, and also when I was a kid with the Mighty Ducks and growing up with the Ducks logos, always wearing those T-shirts and stuff, I always thought it was a cool logo. I have know a lot of Ducks fans actually for some reason, and all of them are always very nice. I'm not a big fan of Corey Perry, but I've always loved Ryan Getzlaf. He's always been a class act in the NHL. So because of that, I'm going to give the Anaheim Ducks a franchise. They always seem to be pretty good. All the fans I've ever met have been pretty nice, and they also have a pretty nice arena down there in Anaheim. Now, the Arizona Coyotes is a hard team for me to rate because, one, this is the original Winnipeg Jets team, and two, they may not have a lot of fans that come out to games, but every Arizona Coyotes fan that I've ever met has been a super passionate, diehard fan, and because of that, I'm going to put them in the A tier because, again, they're not really a team that I hate because I've never really met anyone in an Arizona fan that's been a dick, and that's been rude, that's been pushy, that doesn't understand the game of hockey. Usually, every time I've met an Arizona fan, when I have, they've been very, very good at knowing, understanding hockey, and it's just been a good discussion to have. So because of that, I'm going to put them at the A tier. Now, Boston is an interesting one because I have never had a good conversation with anyone that's been a Boston fan or hockey related. They beat my team back, my second favorite team back in the Cup final, the Vancouver Canucks, back in 2011. And let's just say that ever since then, the fans, and I hate their commentators, they're so biased. I'm going to put them in the C tier because I just can't stand their fans and the commentator. Their commentator, I'm not sure exactly what his name is, but is one of the worst commentators I've ever heard of. One of the most biased commentators of all time. But it's just unbearable to listen to if you have to listen to the the home broadcast if your team is in Boston, unfortunately. But nonetheless, yeah, putting them in the C tier list. Getting over to the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, this is an interesting one because I've never really liked the Carolina Hurricanes, and I've never really hated the Carolina Hurricanes. So because of that, I'm going to put them right in the middle at the B tier. I've never really had any problem with them, but I've never really had any discussions with Carolina fans, and they've never really done anything to sour my team. I like their current makeup of their roster. I've always liked Eric Staal and Jordan Staal back in the day, and I just thought that they were always a weird team. You know, it's weird that they won a cup back when I was a younger kid. That was always weird because it just felt like that came out of nowhere, and because they were never really that good again, it felt like. But nonetheless, I don't have a really big problem with them, so I'm going to put them at the B tier. Now, the Chicago Blackhawks, I'm going to be putting them in the S tier because I grew up when I was about, 10, coming into when they were in their dynasty. I watched a lot of Chicago in the playoffs, and they were really fun to watch. Jonathan Toews is an awesome guy. I've met him a couple times, talked to him a lot. I have a signed puck from him when I met him in Winnipeg at different events and stuff like that. A very cool guy. Patrick Kane is an awesome, awesome hockey player. I've always loved watching Patrick Kane. And when the Chicago Blackhawks were in their prime with the players they had, Duncan Keith, Corey Crawford, Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, they were just such a fun team to watch. Marian Hossa, they're just such a fun, entertaining team. And I really have, and also I know a lot of their fans, and although they do have a lot of bandwagon fans since they got good, a lot of the diehard fans and even, newer fans, a lot of the ones that I've met with and discussed in real life and on forums and whatnot have been all very polite. So I'm going to put them at the S tier because I also have just enjoyed watching the Blackhawks hockey throughout my life so far. Now, the Avalanche, again, I'm going to be putting them at the B tier because I've never really had a problem with them. I've always loved Joe Sakic, Burnaby Joe, but other than Joe Sakic, I've never really had an attachment to this team. I never wasn't around in the 90s when they were good, in the early 2000s when the 2001, because I was basically 0 and 1 years old, right? So I wasn't really around for that, and I never really watched them that much. They're a very good team now, but again, a team that I've never really watched that much and never had that much communication with the fan base, so I'm going to put them at the B tier. Now, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, I've become more of a Columbus fan recently, but even growing up, I was a fan of Columbus. I'm going to put them in the A tier. I watched a lot of Columbus because I was a big fan of Rick Nash growing up. I always thought he had great hands, had a great shot. It was just a really fun player to watch, very dynamic. Anytime Columbus was on TV, I always made sure to have that game and go back and forth just to watch for Rick Nash's case when I was a kid. Now that Patrick Laine and Jack Roslovic are on Columbus too, they're a team I check in on a lot every once in a while, so definitely a team that I have always had a little bit of attachment to. The Dallas Stars is an interesting one. I don't really have an attachment to the Dallas Stars. I don't really care about that team. I never really have. I never talked to anybody about them. Not that they're a bad franchise. I just never really been, known anyone that's really rooted for them ever, and talked to anyone that's rooted for them. And I've never really watched a Dallas game, other than the fact that when they've played one of the teams that I've watched, like the Canucks or the Jets, consistently like that. Other than that, I've never really been a big fan of them. I do like the fact that Patrick Laine is able to light the hell out of them up every time he plays, because that's very entertaining. Other than that, though, no problem with them just putting him in the B tier, because that's basically, the type of communication and type of experiences I've had with them. Now, the Red Wings, I'm going to be putting at the C tier, because the Red Wings, I have just had to deal with so many idiot fans that think they were the best team ever because of their playoff streak. It was so annoying to talk to. I'm so glad that it's over. Not because, I'm some cynic, but because I just, when your team is so mediocre for so many years and you just barely make the playoffs, you're not a cup contender. And I always had these guys in my high school that were such big Red Wings fans that were always like, oh, we're going to win the cup, and they'd get knocked out in 6 games in the first round. It's like, you get back down to earth, my friend. But other than that, I've just had a lot of bad experience with a lot of bandwagon and, Detroit fans that just don't really know what they're talking about. Although they've had some fantastic teams, I just didn't watch a lot of them growing up, and I'm going to put them in the C tier. Now, the Florida Panthers, I'm going to be putting in the C tier as well. I used to like this team back in when I was, maybe in grade 8 and 9, but I just can't get into watching them anymore. They're just such a boring team. They're boring without fans. They're boring when they were allowed to have fans, because they still don't have any. They're worse than Arizona at fan attendance, I feel like. They're worse with fans in general. I've never met a Florida Panther fan in my life, other than when I used to like them as like my 5th favorite team back when I was a kid. So other than that, I would say that Florida I would just put in the C tier, because I've never really had a conversation with anyone that's a Florida fan, because I've never met anyone that's a Panther fan, really. So other than that, I'm going to put them there. And again, going with the Oilers, I'm going to be putting them in the C tier as well. I hated the Edmonton Oilers back when I was growing up, because of the fact that they had so much luck in the lottery all the time, but also because of the fact that they were just good fun to hate on. They were just a bad team for so long, and they have been for a while. They're better now, obviously, with Connor McJesus and on their team. But other than that, they're just a fun team to hate for a long time, and a lot of the fans they have there are so entitled because of the Gretzky days. If they feel like, even though they were never even around for that in the 80s, they feel like because their teams had the great one and they are that dynasty years and all that they're just the best team of all time, but they're really not. But other than that, the Oilers were the best team of best time back then. Just they're not the best franchise of all time, just because they had the best team at the time. And yeah, whatnot. Other than that, that's where I'm going to be putting them there. I don't really like the Oilers, never really have. Now, the Islanders is another interesting one for me. I'm going to be putting them in the B tier, because I don't really have an issue with the Islanders. Never watched them, really. Never been and talked to anyone that's been an Islanders fan. I know a lot of fans that are fans of the Rangers. Never really know anyone that's an Islander fan. So because of that, just going in the B tier. Now, the Kings, I'm going to be putting in the A tier. Every time I've talked to a Kings fan, it's been a good hockey conversation at any hockey card show, any event that I've went to. I have a really good friend who's a King fan, who's very insightful and knows a lot about hockey. And he introduced me to some more Kings fans, and it's just a very interesting team. They've also had some really interesting and good players, and some really good runs when you look back at how entertaining those playoff years were when they won the cup, especially coming back like that, being knocking out the Canucks and going to win and being the 8th seed. Very interesting, very fun team to watch back when they were very good in the playoffs, obviously. And just, yeah, a team that I've never really had a lot of issues with. I've always loved their logos too, so I'm going to put that in the A tier. Now, the Wild. I'm going to put the Wild in the A tier, because I think the Wild... Actually, I'm going to put the Wild in the S tier, because the Wild have some of the best fans in the NHL. I love the Winnipeg Jets rivalry with the Minnesota Wild. It's been awesome ever since that series, and even before then, with just the fans and whatnot, and the atmosphere within the buildings. Love Minnesota hockey, have for a long time. They're a great team. Second game I ever saw in the NHL was the Vancouver Canucks against the Wild, and I remember that because that game, the Wild lost all their gear for some reason on the plane. It didn't show up, and they all had to use like different pads and stuff, and I remember that being a big deal, and the Canucks just ripped the goalie apart that game, because I don't remember. People were blaming equipment, but I just always have that little memory I remember. Nonetheless, I think that they have a pretty good fan base. They got a nice logo, good jersey, although they've been pretty mediocre for a long time, never really being able to get over the hump, being good but not good enough. They're still a fun team and a good fan base, so I'm putting them in the S tier. Now, the Habs. This is an interesting one, because my dad is a Habs fan, and let's just say that me and him differ on a lot of opinions with hockey, so I'm going to put the Habs down at the A tier, because although the Habs fans are, it can be annoying to talk to, I feel like the Habs fans are still more, I can talk to a Habs fan and have a better conversation more than I can with a Leafs fan. And other than that, I don't really hate a lot of teams, and even though the Habs can be a little, sour to talk to sometimes, I feel like having them at the A tier is where I would best have them on my list. And the Nashville Predators, I'm putting them at the C tier. because I've always just despised Nashville for some reason. Every playoff game, every time I've had to play them, or not play them, obviously I don't play in the NHL, but every time my team plays Nashville, I just want them to clobber them. I've just never liked Nashville. Back when the Winnipeg Jets played them in that second round, when they went to the Western Conference Final and lost to Vegas back in 2017, I hated that series. That was like, oh god, I'll never forget that, how much hate I had towards Nashville that series. So definitely a C tier team for me because of the fact that I just have such a rivalry with them. Now the Devils is an interesting one. I've always liked the New Jersey Devils. They're an A tier team for me. Their fan base is pretty awesome. They've had some great players, great goalies, a very fun team to watch. They're also a very underrated team with some underrated guys, and I always like that. So definitely an A tier team for me. Getting over to the Rangers, I'm going to be putting the Rangers also in the A tier because, honestly, I just think that they're a pretty good, fun team in the past. They've had some great players. Martin St. Louis is one of my favorite players of all time, and I love watching him play on the Rangers back in the end of his career. I loved Henrik Lundqvist, one of my favorite goaltenders of all time. He's just such a beast. I love watching that guy play when he was with the Rangers. They've just had some really good teams in the last 10 years, and they were a fun team to watch, and I definitely have always enjoyed conversations with them. And when I was in New York City, I wore my Jets jersey because it was the playoffs, and I had a lot of interaction with Rangers fans, and it was always pretty positive, even though they were ripping at me a little bit. It was, good back and forth hockey banter within fan bases, and I thought that it was they were very insightful, and that's something that I always like about it, is that you can always have fun in conversations with somebody, but some fan bases are just, their fans are always bad, and there's going to be bad apples in every fan base, but for the majority of what I've experienced, the Rangers have some pretty awesome fans for what I've talked to, and pretty diehard fans nonetheless. Now, the Ottawa Senators, for me, again, is an S-tier team, just because of the fact, no, I'm just joking, I really don't care about Ottawa. They're a B-tier team for me. Never really watched them that much growing up. Didn't really care about Ottawa that much. Danny Elferson is a pretty good player. Other than that, never really cared about them that much. Same with Philadelphia. Same thing goes for them. B-tier team. Never really watched them. Just an East Coast team. I didn't watch that much. Penguins, for me, are an S-tier team just because of the fact that my sister is a Penguins fan and my uncle is a Penguins fan. I watch a lot of Penguins hockey. Also, the fact that Crosby's Crosby, Malkin's Malkin. Phil the Thrill back when he was on there with the two-time Cup champion return. They've been a very good, fun team to watch for a long time, and anytime you got Crosby, they're going to be an entertaining team to watch, regardless of whether or not you really like them or not. Now, the San Jose Sharks, again, for me, they're an A-tier team just because of the fact that Jumbo Joe is one of my favorite players of all time. I've always loved watching Jumbo Joe play. Same with Patrick Marleau back when they were both in their prime. Very good players. Just a fun team to watch. Also, they're kind of fun just to rip because they had such good teams for so long and they've never been able to get over the hump, and they're just one of those teams that just sucks in the playoffs, and it's just kind of fun to rip them. And their fans are pretty passionate at their Shark, wherever, I think the Shark Tank is what they're called, the arena. But they're pretty passionate fan bases. I love the shark head that comes down, the players run out of. They've organization's also very classy. They've done a lot of Make-A-Wish stuff with people, and I'm just very classy organization. I have a lot of respect for the Sharks, and I love the respect for their players and whatnot. Now, I'm gonna put the Kraken at the D tier because the Kraken haven't played a single game yet, and they don't even have a player, I don't think, nonetheless. But regardless of that, St. Louis, for me, is a C-tier team. I've never liked the Blues, especially considering that they beat the Jets on that year when they won the Cup. Bennington was never as good as people said he was in that series, and a lot of those highlight saves were just pucks that were never elevated off the ground. If they were in the back of the net, and just a lot of bitterness towards St. Louis for that, and that's just because I'm a Jets fan. But nonetheless, it's just a fun video. I don't have a lot of hate for any team anyway. Getting over to the Tampa Bay. Now, this is an interesting one. I'm going to put Tampa Bay at B tier because although they have, been pretty dominant, they're a fun team to watch, and I've also not really considering the fact that they've been good for recently. I'm going more to when they were the early 2000s with Martin St. Louis and Vinny LeCavalier and stuff like that. That's when I really liked to watch them when I was a kid. I always picked Tampa Bay when I was going into play NHL against any of my friends. I was almost always Tampa Bay. I just really liked using Martin St. Louis in NHL when I was a kid. So yeah, definitely a B tier team for me just because of the fact that I used to watch them a lot when I was a kid, and I haven't really watched them for the last maybe 10, 12 years. So other than that's why they're a B tier team. Now the Leafs, this is the one you've all been waiting for, right? I think you all know where they're going for me. I don't think I need to say much more. If you've watched this channel for a long time, you know why I hate the Leafs. But if you don't know why I hate the Leafs, let's just say that almost every time I've met a Leafs fan, they've been the most ignorant, selfish, self-centered, they don't even know anything about hockey, it feels like. And I know there are some really good Leaf fans out there, don't get me wrong. But personal experience, I've just had the worst experience with Leaf fans. They've just been the worst fans to talk to. They're so bitter about everything. Like, you say, oh, I think that the Leafs are good in this area, but then you critique them and they're like, oh, no, they're not bad. What are you talking about? You say their defense is bad and they rip you apart, and it's just, I don't know. Every time I've met a Leafs fan and talked to them, it's just been a really bitter and not pleasant conversation about hockey. So just putting in the D tier because of that. I just can't stand that fan base. One of the most entitled fan bases, I feel like. Not all the fans are bad. I'm saying that for everyone, but they have the most entitled fan bases. And for what? They haven't been good for like 50 years. So nonetheless, I don't care really about the Leafs at all. Now, the Canucks for me are an S tier team. You know why. They're my second favorite team. Grew up watching the Canucks. Sedins are some of my favorite players of all time. Bertuzzi, Naslund, Morrison, not GST line, excuse me, but the West Coast Express was one of the first lines that got me really into hockey. Love the Canucks, love their logo, and just love that team. Love my city, and that's the Canucks, and that's my second favorite team. Now, Vegas, for me, is a C tier because they beat the Jets in the Western Conference Final, and if they didn't, the Jets would have won the Cup that year. Marc-Andre Fleury doesn't rob the Jets that series. They beat the Caps, in my opinion, so hate them because of that, but also just because, you've been in the league for so long, you have no idea what failure is, and it sucks because you have such good players, and you never had to go through hardship yet, and you probably won't for another, at least 10 years, so it's pretty bitter. Nonetheless, though, C-tier team. Going over to the Capitals, I'm going to give them a B-tier team just because of the fact that I like Ovi, and I don't really watch them, but I love Ovi, so I'll give them a B list. Don't need to say much about those guys. Calgary, going to give them a... honestly, I feel like giving Calgary a D tier because I've never liked the Flames. Really. You know what? I'm going to do it. I don't like the Flames just because... I don't know. Every time, nothing to do with fans. It's just because I just love watching my teams beat the Flames. I don't know why. I've always done that. I have a friend who lives in Calgary, and me and him just love ripping the Flames because he's a Canucks fan, and that's just how it's always been for me recently, and I just don't really like the Flames. Buffalo, again, there's going to be a B tier team. Don't really watch them. Don't really care that much. But yeah, just putting them right there. But yeah, that is my tier list for basically all the NHL teams in the league. So let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, what your favorite teams are, what your least favorite teams are, and all that. Subscribe if you're new to the channel, you enjoy the content and whatnot. I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Go Jets, go.